Cool. Let's get started. Oops, sorry, getting ahead of myself here. So the number one thing I want you to take away from this, if you take away nothing else, is that the Dreamit program is designed specifically for startups who are beyond the accelerator stage. And I'm going to break that down in a little bit more detail, but I just want to get that out there so you understand kind of the types of startups we're talking to and want to work with and want to invest in, and whether it applies to you. So number one, what do I mean by that? So we're different than most other accelerator programs. In fact, we used to run the traditional pre-seed accelerator program. It was actually a program that was pioneered by Techstars and Dreamit, the second and third oldest accelerators in the world, respectively. They still do that, and we don't. So the startups we're looking for are with your startups that have revenue, or in some occasions, very strong pilots that are very close to leading to revenue. And we're really looking to focus on helping them scale so they can get to that Series A. We have something we call customer sprints. I'm going to tell you a lot more about that in a moment. And these are focused explicitly on getting you those customers, as well as investor sprints, which are focused exclusively on getting you in front of the investors that can lead your next round. And in order to do that, we've changed a lot of what you would traditionally think of when you think of the word accelerator, including the offer and the fact that there is no relocation required. Most of the program is done virtually. We also have a venture fund. In fact, I usually lead by saying that we're a $50 million venture fund. It's our third fund. And the program exists solely to feed the venture fund. So in addition to being a top accelerator, we're also one of the most active VC funds in North America. We've been active since 2008, so we've got started pretty much from every single industry you can think of across the board, for a total of well over 300 startups and a total enterprise value of over $2 billion. Right now, we focus on three verticals. There's health tech. And if you're a health tech startup, you're welcome to listen in, but this isn't really focused on health tech. Secure tech, same for you guys. But we focus right now, and I personally focus on what we call urban tech. So within urban tech, there are basically three subcategories: real estate tech, which we also sometimes refer to as prop tech, construction tech, and the parts of smart city that, frankly, the parts that don't suck. And what I mean by that is if you're dealing with things like energy, transportation, waste, or water, but your primary customer is a general contractor, a real estate developer, a property manager, or even an architect or a broker, we're interested. If you're primarily focused on selling to the government, it's never a hard no, but it's a much harder case to make. It's just, it's not typically the kind of customers we work with. And that's why we call it urban tech, because it's a little bit of a lot of things and not some of other stuff. So we wanted to come up with a good catch-all phrase that covered everything that we're interested in. And if you're not sure whether or not your startup falls within or without urban tech, that's a great question. So feel free to put it using the Q&A tab at the bottom of the Zoom window. So what are we looking for specifically? So obviously we're looking for big and urgent problems, right? If it's not very painful, no one cares. We're also looking for large markets, no supplies there, because I hate to win and not make money. Strong team, because otherwise you're pretty much dead in the water. And obviously we want something where it's unique insight that's defensible and scalable. So all the typical stuff that a venture fund looks for. We also like the startups to have about 6 months of runway as they exit the program. We find that especially when you're raising a larger round, be it a Series A or a seed extension, it does take at least 6 months to pull that together. Maybe it takes less time, if you're super hot round, but I've all too often seen companies come out of a program, both Dreamit in the past and other programs, and just not have enough runway they need to actually get through the fundraising process. So as a general rule, we want end of program plus 6 months of runway. When I talk about traction, Traction is one of those lovely squishy words. In fact, I wrote a piece called "Why is Traction Squishy?" It's not required reading, but if you want to, it's interesting to see how investors look at the word traction. For us, what it means is you have enough revenue and enough referenceable customers, or at least really, really strong pilots, that if I'm going to put you in front of Fortune 500 companies, C-level people, SVP level people at those companies, you're credible enough to begin to work with them from day one. And again, if you're not sure exactly if you're there or not yet, please ask. That's one of the great things about the Q&A. You get to ask questions. Okay, as I alluded to, there are a couple of pillars to the program. One of them is the 2-week multi-city customer sprints, which we do in the middle of the program. Then at the end of the program, we do a 2-week investor sprint, which we split between the Bay Area and the East Coast. And then, of course, there's quite a bit of one-on-one coaching, or as I like to call it, there's customers, capital, and coaching. Let's go into a little more detail here. So we have well over 70 customer sprint partners on in the Urbantech track, and you've got the logos of some of them. So you can see these are extremely large, as well as large to mid-size contractors, developers, property managers, property owners, and the like. So there's, we do our best to make sure that for any company that's in our program, we can make meaningful customer introductions that hopefully can shave as much as 6 months off of a typical enterprise sales. The amount of meetings you get vary. It depends on the partner because they get to choose, but it ranges from about 10 or 11 all the way up to over 25. And that's driven primarily by the type of startup you are. If you're super focused, let's say you deal only with construction tech, then mostly you're going to get interest from the general contractors, whereas some of them span different categories. So it really depends on your startup. In either case, it's 2 weeks of basically a dozen of the best introductions you could possibly get. So the investor sprints are similar. We've got well over 1,000 investors in our basically our investor sprint partner list. We split this between the Bay Area, where we spend a week, and then between New York and typically Boston, at least in Urbantech. The other verticals sometimes go to different cities depending on where their investors are. And these are some of the best VCs in the country. And the goal here is to put you in front of the kind of institutional investors who can actually lead a large round. So it's either a maybe $2 to $4 million seed extension, or a $4 to $6, $8, $10 million Series A. You can't do that with angels, right? It's just slow and painful to try to put together a round like that in 50s and 100s. So we don't actually do demo day. We just found it's not effective in the circumstance, and then you can even argue that it's not effective in general. But that's a different debate we're not going to have today. For what we're looking for, it's simply not the right way to kick off your round. And investor sprints, on the other hand, are a very effective way to do so. Again, the number of meetings you get depends on the VCs who are interested in your startup. It tends to be a little on the lower side if you're super focused, or on the higher side if you have kind of a little bit of a broader appeal. And as a general rule, we tell our startups to expect anywhere between a dozen or over 20 meetings during this 2-week period. And approximately 50% will go on to raise within 6 months after finishing the program. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the program and the pillars of the program. Let's talk about the offer, right? So I started off by saying this is for startups who are beyond the accelerator stage. So obviously, the typical offer where somebody offers you $100,000 or $150,000 for 6 or 8% of your company isn't going to fly for the type of startups that I've just described. The number one reason we do this is for the right to invest in your recent or most or upcoming round. We have the right to do up to $500,000, and we typically exercise it if you have a financial lead. It's hard for us to do all strategics, and if the valuation doesn't get crazy out of whack with your traction. In a way, I like to say that we do this program for basically two reasons. One is to attract great startups, and the other is to due diligence them. The entire program is designed for us to help you and learn about your startup while we do so. In addition to the right to invest up to $500,000, we also get a little bit of advisor equity. It usually comes out to between 0.5 and 1.5 percentage points, and we basically structure it using the equivalent of a SAFE with a notional value of $150,000, simply to let that determine how much equity, advisor equity, we get. It's not a cash investment. It's simply a mechanics that we use so we can come up with the right amount of advisor equity and not simply arm wrestle over, is it going to be 75 basis points or or a full percentage point. Now, we do occasionally take earlier stage companies. Maybe 1 in every 10 or 20 startups we take is bona fide seed stage, but just too awesome to keep our hands off. There's a slightly different offer in that case. So if you're not sure which bucket you fit in, this is a great opportunity to tell me about your startup and ask me. If you're a little early, we can probably take it offline and talk about what might work for you. But it's easy enough for me to give you my quick read during the Q&A session. So we talked a little bit about the 10 polls. Here's the overview. So we are already interviewing companies right now. The kickoff is the week of September 9th. That is in person in Philly. We go deep, we level up everybody's skill set, and there's some socials and all that fun stuff. The next 4 weeks are remote on Zoom, one-on-one for an hour or two a week, where we're prepping you for those customer sprints that I talked about. Those sprints take place in the middle 2 weeks of October, where you are on the road with us. So you're again with us, but we're going into the customer's offices in New York, in Philly, down in Tampa, where we're affiliated with a $3 billion renovation project. And we do it virtually in other cities as well. After those 2 weeks of customer sprints are done, we go virtual again, against 1 or 2 hours per week for the next 4 or 5 weeks, as we prepare you for the investor sprints. And that includes a week of mock VC interviews, where we're actually sitting you down across the table and teaching you how to pitch in those circumstances. This is not get up on a stage, present in a large room, start a theater. This is the actualities of pitching to a venture fund. This is how it works in real life, and we will prep you for that. And to my knowledge, no one else has this kind of a prep program as we do. And for this cycle, the investor sprints are the capstone of the program, and they're the first 2 weeks in December. If you have questions about the time commitment at any one stage during the program, please ask. I can give you a little more detail about that, and I can even direct you to stuff on our website, which will tell you exactly how much time in any given week you should expect to be working on Dreamit versus continuing to do what you have to do to make your startup a success. Key dates, applications close on August 3rd, but we're already interviewing, so please don't wait. All right, if you think you're good for Dreamit, please go to apply.dreamit.com and tell us as much as you can about your startup. If you've already applied in the past, and a lot of companies apply early, that's fine. You can actually go to apply.dreamit.com/update and just update the key portions of your application. As I mentioned before, kickoff is the week of September 9th. The customer sprints are the 2 weeks starting in week of October 14. And the investor sprints are the 2 weeks starting December 2nd. And all this information is on the website as well. Last but not least, maybe you're not ready for Dreamit yet, and you want to. You want to ultimately keep track and apply later. Best thing you could do is follow us on Twitter at Dreamit. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, and we actually have a YouTube channel where we've started to post 3 to 5 minute short videos on key topics, which we're calling daily doses. Dreamit doses. Okay, and with that, let me take a deep breath and start answering some of your questions.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. First question, are you looking at only U.S. firms, or can EU-based companies be eligible for the program?
Oh, that is a super question. Okay, so we don't actually care where you sit, right? So physically, you could be anywhere in the world. We have had companies from Europe, we've had companies from Canada, we have companies from Israel, obviously, Latin America, you name it. The one tricky part for us is that companies need to be incorporated in the US or in Israel for accounting reasons on our part. It has to do with how the IRS treats foreign startups for tax purposes. Arguably, we're being a little bit conservative about it. And what happens in these situations, though, is it's actually fairly simple. The company can create a U.S. corporation, typically a Delaware C Corp, and that becomes the ultimate parent corporation, which will then own the local company. Doesn't change where you sit, it just changes the incorporation issue. It's not something that's unique to Dreamit. A lot of VCs tend to have a preference for that. In addition to the accounting issues, sometimes it's a question of laws. We understand how corporate law works in the US. We don't always understand the nuances in other countries, and especially when you get into less common countries, like we just don't want to be surprised by some quirk or nuance of local law. And then there's always the fun part of getting accounting statements in Estonian, which is not something we're set up for. So it's not unique to Dreamit. Some species do invest in companies without having them reincorporate in the US. Many don't, so it's probably something that you want to think about anyway. Happy to take this offline and give you more specific feedback for your startup. You're welcome to email me directly at andrew@dreamit.com. Introduce yourself if you'd like to continue that particular conversation.
Great. And a question from Dan. He runs a construction tech startup. We're piloting with SMBs, both eyes on enterprise level for the next 6 months. Can you elaborate on what does it mean to be ready to work with Dreamit customers?
Sure. Let's work our way up from kind of the bare minimum. Right, if I'm going to put you in front of Suffolk or Skanska or Turner, etc., you need to be ready for work from day one. Like if Tony says, great, I want to pilot this on a project I've got in Brooklyn, and you're going to say, well, we still have to build a couple of features. Best bet for you is to kind of wait another 6 months. I wouldn't want you to get up there and make a suboptimal first impression. Now, if you're already functional with kind of small and mid-size general contractors, and you got some customers that you can reference, you're starting to get into the strike zone. And that's going to be case by case, right? So the question will then be, how far along is now the best time for you to meet with them? And there's a couple of factors there, depending on what you're doing. If what you're doing is so awesome they can't keep their hands off you, we move you up. We had a company that was actually totally pre-seed, had just done these simple equivalents, what you did, put them in front of related 3 minutes, no, about 30 seconds into it. And the guy says, oh, we could never use you. And, he's taken back, said, why? And it's like, works too well. The unions will never let us do it. And then the other guy at the table was like, oh, we'll just put them in a non-union state. It's like, okay, yeah, we can do that. Let's keep going. Like that awesome. We'll bring you to them a little early. In some cases, it's probably better to kind of bulk up your references before coming in. But that's very case to case. So what I would recommend for you to do is send me an email with your one-pager or your deck. Say, Urbantech AMA follow-up, -company name, and just say, I'm the guy that asked, if our current traction is, the right time to apply to Dreamit or not. Cool?
Great. John Williams has a question. He is a founder with prior commitments conflicting with the Dreamit kickoff week on September 9th. Can the CEO join for one day and other team members like the chief product officer join for the rest of the week?
Sure. So let's talk. What I would suggest is that we talk offline about that. There's different things that happen during different days in the program, and we've made it work, right? Some of the stuff that we do is recorded, so you can catch up after, and some of the stuff we can schedule around. So short answer, John, is don't let that stop you. Shoot me a note, or apply first, then shoot me a note. Or if you've already applied, shoot me a note and tell me you've applied. and then just let me know exactly what your commitments are. It's not ideal, but we've been able to work around scheduling conflicts like that in the past.
Great. And 2 questions about the financial offer. Do you make the cash investment at the start or the end of the program? And is the 150K advisory shares fixed or negotiable?
Okay, so thank you. On the first one, I apologize if I didn't make that clear the first time around. Dreamit only invests once you have a lead investor. Since our terms, and then we're talking now about the $500,000 right to invest, since those are on the exact same terms as the lead investor, we cannot lead, right? That's kind of a truism. The terms are exactly the same, valuation, all that, except for the board seats, which we don't take. We're easier that way. So number one, not at the beginning of the program. By necessity, it has to be at the end of the program. Now, if you have a round that just closed or that's closing during Dreamit, we will participate in that round, but we have to be able to participate at the end of the program plus 30 days, because as I alluded to, this is part of our due diligence. We do some due diligence right up front. We do some other due diligence right when your round is coming together. But a good part of the due diligence is me seeing you pitch these senior level decision makers and seeing how they respond, and having a back channel to them and seeing how excited they are and what they tell me about how you follow up or not. And also the same thing goes for the introductions to the investors, like seeing them respond, seeing how that process plays out is also an input to our due diligence. So structurally, for both of those reasons, we only invest after the program and when you have a lead investor. To answer the second question, we've specifically designed that 150K safe to have no discount and no cap, so that it's a way to determine what the advisor equity becomes. We've done that specifically because we don't want to negotiate. We want the more mature startups to ultimately give us less equity, less advisor equity, because they're further along and they shouldn't give up that much equity. And when they're earlier stage companies and we put in a little bit more work to get them ready, we should get a little bit more. But the short answer to that second question is send me your particular situations. Tell me what your concerns are, what you think your next round will be, what your most recent round was, both the amount invested and the valuation, and information about your traction. And I can tell you kind of where that would play out for you in specific.
And this is a question about a construction tech business. Our business is aimed at subcontractors rather than GCs. Is that equally interesting to Dreamit?
So the answer is yes. We have a couple of companies in that space, most notably Knowify. That's Knowify. They're a New York-based construction tech startup, and they focus on subs. Here's where we need to think, right? So if you're focused on subs, the access to the subs is a little different than it would be if you're going after large GCs. So in some cases, there are channel partnership opportunities with the GCs, where a GC either makes intros for you or decides they love the data that comes out of your project, your product so much that they're actually going to mandate to their subs that they use it. So where those are the cases, we're fairly comfortable that we can bring value to the table from the customer sprints. When it's listed, the only way we get in front of these subs is by Google AdWords or going to trade conferences, and being in front of a large GC just doesn't move the needle for us. Then we really only have 1, 2, or 3 good connections for you on the customer sprint side. And in those cases, what I generally say is this. We need to go deeper into the startup and see if there's enough value in the coaching and the investor introductions that it's still worth bringing you into Dreamit, even though the customer side isn't going to deliver the same kind of value. Right? So for every startup that comes in, if you kind of visualize a pie chart, and each slice is how much you get from the customer introductions, the capital introductions, and the coaching, and also community perhaps, each one of you is going to have a different sense of where the value is going to come out proportionally when you come into the program. And some of you will have a totally different view once you've come out, and that's okay. Right? At the end of the day, it is kind of a holistic question of, does Dreamit help move my company to that next milestone? And if the answer is yes, we just need to go into what might or might not be applicable from the customer sprints with our eyes open. So that's also a case by case. So please, send me your deck, and we can talk about that.
Great. And in terms of attending the customer sprints, how many team members are required to be there? This startup would rather go with their CEO, and either CFO or COO would meeting with new clients.
Super. That's actually a great question. So one of the things that has changed since we went later stage is, when we were earlier stage, we had pretty much the entire team. It was 2, 3, 4 people participate in all parts of the program. Now that we have companies that are doing as much as $1 or $2 million ARR, or annual recurring revenue, they might have teams of 20 plus people. So generally speaking, the startups that participate in Dreamit participate with 1 or 2 people, a founder or perhaps a co-founder. We've had companies do just 1 person. We've had companies do 2 people. That's totally fine. Both are fine. And during individual weekly MD meetings, or managing director meetings on Zoom, if there are other team members who need to be involved at your discretion because of what we're discussing, you're welcome to bring them in as well. So that's overall. Now, for specifically for the customer sprints, I will train up 1 person, right? It's a unique format in many ways, and it takes time to get used to that format. It's super time efficient. The customer partners love it, but it's very time compressed. So I will train 1 person. It's just suboptimal to have 2 different people. They don't get up the learning curve as quickly. But what some teams will do, and it's very effective, is they'll have 2 people come on the customer sprints. 1 person presents, and the other person is there to follow up, right? So the other person is sitting in the back. At the end of the sprint, will give feedback to the main presenter. And depending on how the Q&A session afterwards goes and what the particular partner is interested in, that other person will get right on sending that information to the prospective customer, while the first person is then kind of getting his mind in gear for the next sprint. And the same goes, by the way, for the investor roadshow. 1 person will pitch the investors, and the other person, if any, will focus on follow-up. And that other person can be physically in the room with the main presenter, or can be back home and kind of looped in. We can talk more about it tactically, but the short answer is minimum 1 person. You want to bring a second, that's fine, but that second person is a support role.
Great. And this question comes from Drew. The program seems to cater to startups selling to enterprise and B2B. Do you work with companies that target consumer as well?
Sure, great question. So the answer is less frequently than we used to. And that's partly a focus of how we can help, right? I will tell you straight out, if I don't think I can help your startup, then I don't deserve to have you in the program, right? I mean, it'd be nice to perhaps, but I really don't want to do this unless I can add value. So if you're a direct-to-consumer startup, the reason you might participate in Dreamit are a few. So number 1, the customers may be channel partners or distribution partners for you. They may be a way for you to get in front of your ultimate end user. They might also be partners for you in a different way, like to be able to find the kind of data that you need to make your product better. So for integrations or that kind of stuff as well. And if you are purely direct to consumer, and there's nothing any of the guys whose logos I showed you before, developers or property owners, if there's nothing they can do to help you in any way, shape, or form, you may be in the same situation as the company that was focused on subcontractors and small kind of single-family home contractors, where the value you might get out of the sprints would be smaller. And that would be a case-by-case discussion, right? If it was really something that was exciting about prop tech or construction tech or the parts of smart city that we like, and it was totally and completely consumer-focused, we'd have to talk. I wouldn't say a hard no, but it's definitely something that we need to we need to hash through before we could determine if it were, the right thing for you to do.
Great. And when the startup is fundraising, is the expectation that the startup stop any other fundraising conversations outside of the Dreamit Investor Network, or continue with active fundraising?
No, absolutely not. The more the merrier. I mean, the main thing that gives you potentially a hot round is as many people in the pipeline as possible. One of the things that we would do as you come into the program, or even before, once you're accepted, is to discuss where you are in the process and how the best way to proceed is. In many cases, startups who are fundraising are actually a little bit early for it, and they're having the early conversations. And it's a great way to phrase it, like, hey, I'm not ready to raise yet. I just want to get on your radar, and I want to understand what your investment thesis is, what kind of traction you're looking for when we are there. That's one way to phrase it. And for the companies that are actively bona fide fundraising, there's actually a very cool dynamic that plays out in some cases. Getting into Dreamit can sometimes help you close your round, because you get to go to them. It's like, hey, guys, listen, I've really been talking to you for a while now. I love you guys. I think you'd be great value-add investors in my, $3 million seed extension round. But we just got into Dreamit. In addition to all the dozens of customer introductions they're going to make for us, they have an entire investor sprint program that that's going to put us in front of God knows how many investors. So, I'd like to kind of close this round now and maybe open a larger round later. But hey, I really like you guys. And so if you are interested, I'm willing to, we would love to have you in the round. We just need to know within the next couple of weeks, so we can put this to bed and come in clean. And sometimes that puts, the fear of God or the fear of missing out into them and pushes people kind of off the fence. I'm going to sound like a broken record here. Your specifics may vary, so that's a great conversation for us to have offline.
And next question, what costs are incurred by the startups for travel, logistics, and other things during the course of the program?
Sure, super question. It depends on where you're from, right? So if you are in the US, it's different than if you're coming in from abroad. And if you happen to be based in the Bay Area or New York, it's a little easier, or Philly, it's a little cheaper because that's one less leg of travel and hotel. Just let's pretend that you are somewhere in the US, but not any of those cities, just to give you a kind of a rough illustration. You're going to come to Philly for the better part of a week. So call that 3 or 4 nights. Call it 4 nights. Flights into Philly that time of year aren't crazy. It's a couple $100. I'm going to assume there's one person. You can just double it if there's not quite double it if you compare hotel rooms. An Airbnb in Philly or hotel in Philly is not that expensive. Call about $100 a night. I know a lot of startups that have paid significantly less. So that's week 1. Then you fly home. When you're on the road with us, you're going to fly out down to Tampa and then to New York and take the train down to Philly. Again, you're talking sub $500 in travel expenses. Hotels or Airbnbs in Tampa are cheap. Philly, we just talked about. New York's a bit expensive, though if you're willing to live out in Brooklyn or Queens, you kind of make do without paying an arm and a leg. So $100, $200 a night, we'll see. Probably about $150 per night for New York is doable if you're willing to look. And that's the customer sprints in the middle, and then at the end you fly home. And then the last piece is the investor sprints. You're going to fly out to the Bay Area. Figure that's a couple $100 for that flight. You're going to stay either in San Francisco or Palo Alto itself, or you could stay at the hotels near the airport, so you can go in either direction fairly easily. It's about another $100, $150 a night, depending on where you want to stay. And then we split the next week between New York and Boston, so it's another flight, a couple $100 in all. And if you're doing it as a 3-way trip rather than back and forth each weekend, you save a little bit on the airfare. and you pay a little bit more on the hotel. Anyway, net, we usually say, $5,000 roughly per person. If you're in the US, is probably what you're going to pay out of pocket. Maybe a little less, maybe a little more.
Great. How many companies do you admit to each program? And do you need a in-house tech co-founder to join the program?
Okay, two really great questions. So number one, we take as many or as few as we want. Like, we don't have any sponsors. None of those customer partners pay us a penny. We do this solely to make good investments in our fund. Historically, I've been taking between 5 and 7 companies into each cohort, and we run 2 cohorts a year in the Urbantech program. So it's usually 5 to 7. I've gone as high as 12 in the past, but that's when we were earlier stage. I'd rather not do that. If I had an embarrassment of riches, I would go as high as 8 or 9. But usually 5 to 7 is the sweet spot for me. That's number one. In-house tech was the second question. It's an uphill battle if you don't have in-house tech. I'm going to be honest with you for a couple of reasons. Number one, if your business model revolves at all around tech, not having your tech in-house means you don't have your crown jewel. You don't own your crown jewel. In many cases, there are models where the tech is less core to the business model than other things. So we'd certainly consider it in those cases. The thing that sometimes gives us pause is that when you have your tech in-house, then the discussion becomes, I have all these features I want to build. Which one do I build first? When your tech is outsourced, it's like, I have all these features I want to build. Here's what each one costs. So the first one is a really good decision to have about what your priorities are and where to allocate your scarce resources. The second becomes, every time I want something, I have to put money up. And it tends to slow you down, right? It's a little bit like, I'm at an all-you buffet, how much can I fill on my plate? Versus, I really want to order that extra side. So it tends to, in more subtle ways, slow you down if you don't have your tech in-house. And the last piece, depending on how far along you are, I sometimes look at your ability to bring on in-house tech as your first sale. So it's a little bit concerning if you aren't able to make that sale. But again, that applies mostly at the earlier stages. So anyway, to recap, in-house tech, strongly preferred. It's not a hard no, but you're going to have to be that much more awesome.
Great. And can you talk a little bit about successes of the startups during customer sprints?
Sure.
Do all startups get customers, and what would have been some success cases?
Yeah. So all startups get great meetings, right? So we're looking at a dozen to well over 2 dozen. Last cycle we had a new record where Stringbean, I believe, at 26 or 28 meetings. Many of them do result in 5 or even 6-figure pilots. The difficulty we have in actually compiling the stats is the length of the enterprise sales cycle. So it can take you, even with us kind of speeding things up, it can take you 3 or 6 months to close that. So we're already well into the next cycle when it happens. We don't always hear back from our startups when they close. But yes, the answer is, in many cases, you get pilots and multiple pilots out of it. Not everyone gets it. Like, I can bring you into the room. You still need to close them. And if you don't close them, that tells us something. Right? Part of why we do this is to learn if we're going to, we want to invest in your company. So learning when things don't close is as valuable to us as learning when they do close. Sorry, I couldn't give you more precise stats. It's just the long lead time makes it very difficult for us. I will, however, I'm happy, by the way, to introduce you to any of our alumni who are similar to what you're doing, and you could talk to them about the process and get a sense of what happened for them.
What cities or utility companies does Dreamit have connections to?
Yep. So if you're targeting utilities directly, it's not as tight a fit. So we do have some connections down in Tampa to local utilities as well as to the DOT, but utilities are kind of gov techy for us. So, we're not as strong in that area. In some cases, if you're, an energy related startup, there are angles for you with the developers, the property managers, the landlords, even sometimes with the GCs that make it worthwhile. But if you only and solely sell to utilities, it's probably going to be a tight fit. You're welcome to email me directly and I'll take a look, but I'll be blunt with you. If I can't help you, I'll let you know that I can't, and if I can, I'll even steer you in the right direction.
Does Dreamit consider pre-revenue startups with a product and users, i.e. a freemium model, with no paying users yet?
Okay, that's a great question. Right? So, I sometimes use post-revenue as kind of a shorthand for traction, but that's not the only kind of traction out there. We have a company in our program called in our portfolio called MyComply. And it's around basically making sure that all the employees that are on a construction site have all their certifications. And they have a little bit of revenue, not meaningful. And the reason for it, and the reason we took them despite that, was part of their revenue model was getting to a certain critical mass. Part of their strategy was getting to a certain critical mass when they could turn on part two of what they're doing and monetize that way. So they had significant traction among users, both under individual users and general contractors that were using their software regularly. But the nature of their business was they consciously were not monetizing at this stage. And that worked for us. So the short answer to your question is, if it's conscious and there's a reason for your strategy why you are not monetizing at this stage, then the answer is we'll definitely take a look at it. If you are pre-revenue because you're just not able to charge yet, you haven't built enough of the functionality out or what have you, then that's going to be a little early.
Great. Can you talk a little bit about the makeup of the customer network? Specifically, what is the coverage of multifamily property owners and developers in the network?
So first of all, everything I'm about to show you here and more is on the Dreamit website. So if you go to Dreamit, go to the Urbantech program, you're going to see all of these logos and more. There's some of them that are not up yet for whatever reason, but most of them are there. And you can see already here that a lot of these are large multifamily, either developers, owner-operators, or property managers. You get guys like Avalon Bay, Brookfield, Blackstone, ZRS is a very large property management company, Silverstein, Bizzuto. I don't have to read them off to you. There's a bunch of them there. It's actually not a bad time to mention, when we bring a company into the program, in addition to the introductions that we make to people who are already in our customer network, I often ask all of our companies to give me their wish list of the top 10, 20, or even 40 partners they're trying to get through that they haven't quite gotten to yet. And I find that there's usually about 25 to 30% of those customers that I'm either already connected to, but that are not officially part of our customer sprint network, or I have a really warm connection to. And then I'll reach out on their behalf, kind of bespoke for those type of customers. And many of the people that you see on the page today became customer sprint net partners because of that one-off outreach. Short answer to your question, if you're servicing multifamily, yeah, we got you covered.
Chris is asking a question. If you have long-term contracts, i.e. 3+ years, that will generate meaningful SaaS revenue that will be activated later this year, are they ready for Dreamit?
It's going to be one of those case by cases. So if it is signed contracts, not just LOIs, and not just customers in the pipeline, and there's really nothing holding you back from charging other than certain milestones that you yourself control, it seems pretty solid to me. But I got to go dig under the hood and take a close look, because I found a couple of times in those situations, the contracts get a little squishy when you look at it, because that stuff hasn't been built yet. It's not quite as binding as it looks. So the devil's in the details there. But in principle, if you have signed contracts that are solid and the money's just going to come in later, and there's nothing out there that's out of your control to prevent that from happening, yeah, I count that.
Great. And one person is asking about connections with universities. We used to run an EdTech program, so maybe you still have some of those connections.
Yeah, I'm happy to touch on that. So one of the verticals, and I think we can roll it back a little bit. One of the verticals that we used to run is EdTech, and you can see a couple of the companies there, and there's more of them on the Dreamit website. If you go to the portfolio page, you can look at it sliced by any of our current 3 verticals plus EdTech. I ran that EdTech program, so if you are a crossover between Urbantech and EdTech, you don't have to go anywhere else. We do have relationships still with a number of universities, also with some K-12 and corporate learning people. And we have access to the network of prior portfolio companies, many of whom have raised B rounds, some of whom have raised, credit facilities north of $150 million. And between them and between me personally, we can get you in front of a fair number of universities as well. Again, we'll talk about this case by case if you'd like. By the way, the same thing applies if you are a crossover between different cycles. So there are prop tech companies and construction tech companies out there who the nature of their product is especially useful, say, for health tech, for hospital developments. And when that happens, and vice versa, when we have like a secure tech company that's got a product that's really good for, say, construction firms, we will bring you along on the other cycles, other verticals, customer sprints. So it's a very interesting crossover there, potential as well. Just when you come in, that first week, that kickoff week, we talk about it. And I would alert my opposite number in the other verticals to make sure that they put you out in front of their network as well.
Great. And can you talk about whether we invest in marketplace companies, and do we invest in cryptocurrency or blockchain companies?
Okay, it was only a matter of time before someone used the B word. Okay, marketplaces are an awesome, lasting source of competitive advantage, right? If you look at Craigslist, it is butt ugly, and nobody has been able to knock it off its perch in 20 plus years. And that's because of the strength of the marketplace. So we absolutely love marketplaces, but they have to be within our vertical, right? I mean, it's got to be, if it's a between, subcontractors and general contractors, that's awesome, right? If it's a marketplace between, between tenants in multifamily housing and the services that are offered to them, that's awesome, right? And generally speaking, we can help you with at least one side of the marketplace. So we do love that. Again, specifics depend on your company, and you're welcome to send me that information. Now, let's talk about blockchain. There are certain words that I hear regularly that are startups using fairy dust. It's like, oh, we're going to sprinkle some NLP on this, or some AI, or some blockchain. It's got to be a good company where, in this case, blockchain is relevant to the startup in more than a marginal way. So there are certain things that were simply not possible before blockchain came along. I love that, because that answers the question, why now? And that's one of the biggest questions that we ask whenever we look at a startup. So it simply wasn't possible without blockchain. Great, that is a good use of blockchain. If, on the other hand, it's kind of marginal, or it takes a little bit of cost out of the system, then I really don't care. I'm the guy in the back of the room that when someone comes out, like, tries to use blockchain to make a mediocre idea that's 5 years past its prime look sexy again, I'll sit in back and I'll go, block shit, right? That's me. I'm not kind of that asshole, pardon my language. But again, case by case, right? I am very bullish on blockchain in general, but it's got to be where it's really relevant. Now let's talk about crypto. We do not invest in crypto just for crypto's sake. That's currency speculation. There are a lot of people that make a lot of money speculating in foreign currencies. They can do crypto. Using blockchain to tokenize certain assets, sometimes that's meaningful. There are a lot of companies trying to do that for, say, real estate, fractional ownerships. I'm not so excited about that. I'm happy to tell you why at length on a different occasion. But using blockchain to tokenize stuff is fine. It depends, again, is that integral to what makes this startup awesome, or is it just fairy dust sprinkled on the side? We have yet to invest in a company that had done an ICO in the past. It's tough. It creates kind of questions, unanswered questions that we would have to deal with for your next round. But, I'm willing to talk about it if that's your specific situation. I hope that answered your question.
All right. I think that's it for the questions. Do you want to just give some parting thoughts and maybe a reminder on the application deadline?
Sure, absolutely. Okay, so number one, if you are on the edge of maybe I should apply now, maybe I shouldn't, apply now. We love actually seeing companies, even if they're a little early, and sometimes we're able to jump in and help, right? Like, hey, most of our GCs prefer to wait, but I happen to know that Whiting Turner is very interested in something like this, and they're willing to get involved a little earlier. Would you like an intro? We like to pay it forward that way. And in fact, when you do apply 6 months later, the ability to toggle between, the past view and the current view really helps us know for reals how much progress you've made. So if you think you're on the cusp, go ahead, apply. There's no stigma to that at all. Number two, if you're thinking, well, okay, I've got until August 3rd to apply, don't wait. I'm looking at applications right now. It's generally not in your best interest to be the last one I look at after my eyes are glazing over from 100, 200, 300 prior startups. Get me while I'm fresh if you can. So my advice is to apply early, both in the cycle and if you think you might be a little early overall for Dreamit. Sorry, Charles, what were the other questions? I kind of lost myself there.
Just a reminder of when to apply and any final thoughts.
Yeah. So those are the two main ones. The other thing is I'm available. You can reach out to me if you have any questions. My email address is andrew@dreamit.com. It's not that crazy hard to remember. When you do reach out to me, just make my life a little bit more tolerable. I get a lot of email, so just use a subject line like Dreamit Urbantech AMA follow-up - your company name. Include your deck or your one pager, and just try to keep it to like 4 or 5 sentences. Like, hey, I heard the AMA. My main question, we do XYZ, 1 sentence or 2. My main question is, you fill in the blank. You think it's a good time, a good fit for the program, a good time to apply, whatever your question is. I do answer all my email. The ones that are short, concise, and easy to scan go to the top of the pile. So, all that.
Awesome.
And that's all I got, Charles.
Thank you so much for taking the time. And please, all you founders on the webinar still follow up with any other questions to the emails listed here. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you all.